And dear friends, this is the third consecutive Saturday that we assemble on a virtual mode to participate in a webinar. We are extremely happy to inform you that the response of the participant to our invitation was really encouraging and sufficient enough to march forward with similar programs. The topic for today's discussion is of great importance. Equally important is the speaker of the day. It is my profound privilege to welcome you all to this meeting, and I do so. Friends, we would also like to inform you that those who are interested in getting updates on legal information as well as seminars organized by the ILC High Court Unit may please join our WhatsApp group. And friends, we will begin our program now with a silent prayer to the God Almighty.
Distinct presidents എല്ലാവരും ഒന്ന് ശ്രദ്ധിക്കണേ.
Thank you. Let me now invite Advocate George Patel, State Secretary of the ILC, as well as a member of Seminar Committee, to welcome the gathering. So, Patel.
Chairman, yes. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. The chairman of this webinar, Advocate C. Valsalan, the President of Indian Lawyers Congress Kerala High Court Unit, our Honorable Chief Guest and Speaker of the Day, Senior Advocate, Mr. Justice R. Basant, the State Vice President of Indian Lawyers Congress, and the topic introducer of this webinar, Advocate Vanjiyur Parameswaran, all the reverend dignitaries who participate in this webinar from various court centers of India, respected senior advocates of our High Court, my dear friend advocates and colleagues. Without much introduction, I welcome all of you to this webinar, which is being conducted by the Indian Lawyers Congress Kerala High Court Unit. As we all know, this is the fourth webinar in this series. The first one was on topic Justice to Vulnerable People and Role of Statutory Commissions in India. In that webinar, we could hear His Lordship, Justice Devan Ramachandran, and two other dignitaries. The second one was on topic Admission and Confession, with a special reference to the Apex Court judgments. In that webinar, the topic was presented by His Lordship, Justice V. Ramkumar. The third one was on topic Data Protection and Privacy Laws. The topic was presented by His Lordship, Justice Muhammad Mushtaq. For this day, we are gathered in this online platform to hear the most respected former judge of our High Court, who is now a senior advocate of the Honorable Supreme Court of India, who is none other than our own Basant sir. Topic for today's discussion is privileges of legislators, which has much contemporary relevance in our practice as well as in politics. For many among us, Justice Basant need no introduction. If I make an attempt to portray Basant sir in some non-templates, it will be a futile exercise according to me. If I rightly understood Basant sir, he should be celebrated as an advocate, as a lawyer of the trial court, than as a judge. I heard this testimony from Honorable Justice K.T. Thomas when I was a junior advocate attending a training session organized by the Honorable High Court at Charalkunna. I felt that at some times when Basant sir was a judge, he was craving to join back into the fraternity of the bar, fraternity of the advocates, after his retirement. I'm happy to wish a warm welcome to Basant sir for a personal reason too. Sir may not be recollecting now. I joined the Supreme Court Bar Association as an advocate on the very same day when His Lordship joined the Supreme Court Bar Association as a senior advocate. There was a list of 11 persons who had to attend the interview on that day, in which I could surprisingly notice the name of Basant sir. Just a couple of names ahead to mine. That was one among the finest moments in my life as a lawyer. Sir, we are eagerly waiting to hear you after a few long years. With a sense of gratitude for your kind setting apart this valuable time for us, I welcome you on behalf of the High Court Unit of Indian Lawyers Congress and on behalf of all respected members who are gathered here in this webinar. Today, the topic of discussion is being introduced by our State Vice President and Advocate of our High Court, Advocate Vanjiyur Parameswaran. He was Additional Solicitor General once. Vanjiyur sir needs no introduction. He is our leader. On behalf of all, I welcome you, sir, to this webinar. This meeting is chaired by the President of the Indian Lawyers Congress Kerala High Court Unit, Advocate C. Valsalan. On behalf of all, I welcome you, sir. Many other dignitaries are here. Our State President, the former Director General of Prosecution, T. Asaf Ali, sir, former Advocate General Dandapani, sir, senior advocates, including Advocate George Pundotam, Raju Joseph, sir, some other judicial officers from within the state and outside the state. I think they are also participating in this webinar. Students of law from various law colleges, Advocate Haridra Nath, former state treasurer of the State Committee of the Indian Lawyers Congress, students from law colleges, my colleagues in the organization and in the profession. I wish you all a nice day with us today. I welcome each one and all to this webinar in the name of Indian Lawyers Congress, especially of our High Court Unit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the warm welcome that you have offered. Advocate C. Valsalan, High Court Unit President of the ILC, is presiding over the meeting. I invite Sri Valsalan, sir, for the presidential address. Sir. Valsalan, sir.
Unmute.
Senior lawyer of the Honorable Supreme Court and former judge of the Kerala High Court, respected Justice Sri Basant sir. We are having the webinar on the topic of privileges of legislatures, which has a multifarious phase and thoughts, especially during the present scenario as a contemporarily important issue that is to be presented by, introduced by our beloved State Vice President, Sri Vanjiyur Parameswaran sir. And further, I welcome our respected seniors and other colleagues of the Kerala High Court and other bars of the Kerala state, and especially the advocates, learned lawyers and seniors and retired judges of the other states, especially Andhra Pradesh and also Karnataka, who are attending this webinar as such. Now it's a very serious topic which has to be given prolonged thought over as to what was the limitation for these privileges, which is not defined anywhere else, especially only confined to the judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court and High Court as to what are all the privileges. Present scenario, as I say, the government of Kerala recently filed the SLP before the Honorable Supreme Court relating to the issues that happened in the Assembly some years back. And the Honorable Supreme Court somewhat defined as to how far the privileges can be extended. And further, we have to think over all these in relation to the topics that has to be presented. Anyway, I don't want to take much of the time because we are all seriously awaiting our learned Justice Basant sir to give his speech and his thoughts over what is the privileges of legislators on the basis of the circumstances that is prevailing now in the country. And I conclude with that. I welcome all, sir, for this webinar. And I conclude my speech as such. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The topic is introduced by Advocate P. Parameshwaran Nair, State Vice President of the ILC, as well as former ASD of the High Court of Kerala. Let me invite Sri Parameshwaran sir for his introductory remarks. Sir. Parameshwaran sir, please.
Mr. Asaf Ali, State President of ILC, Sri and former Director General Prosecution, Sri KP Dandamani, former Advocate General, Senior Lawyers Raju Joseph, who is the State Vice President of ILC, Sri George Pundotam, State Officers of ILC, Ajit, Ranjit, and also V.S. Harindranath, who is here, Sri MP Ashok Kumar, former President, Advocates Association, and my dear friends who all have converged here. I feel honored, delighted, and privileged for having got an opportunity to be part of this webinar on the topic privileges of legislators. The topic falls under Articles 105 and 194 of the Constitution of India. Article 105 deals with the powers, privileges, and immunities of Parliament and its members. And Article 194 governs the powers, privileges, and immunities of state legislators and their members. This particular subject has now gained much importance and relevancy in 2015. The then Finance Minister, late Sri K.M. Mani, was subjected to belaboring while he was simply discharging his duties as a finance minister by presenting the annual budget for the year 2015-2016. While who are now members of the ruling party, the speaker's chair, computers, and other public properties were destroyed in the melee. Now the moot question posed by me is whether the privileges and immunities granted to the legislators embrace within it the right to indulge in criminal acts that tantamount to contumacy of the House. The second question is whether in such cases the legislators have any legal immunity from criminal prosecution. Can they freely indulge in nefarious activities on the floor of either the Parliament or the state legislatures? My answer would be a blatant no. They have only the right to exercise freely the freedom of speech and expression and vote in the manner they wish. Anything said by them expressing their views and thoughts are exempted from any liability and cannot be tried in the court of law. The freedom of speech and expression guaranteed to a citizen under Article 19(1) of the Constitution of India is completely different from the freedom of speech and expression provided to a member of the Parliament. Under Article 121 of the Constitution of India, the members of the Parliament are restricted from discussing the conduct of the Supreme Court and High Court. Even if this happens, only the court can interfere. No privilege and immunity can be claimed by the member for anything which is said outside the proceedings of the House. And also they have got freedom from arrest while the houses are in session. Also protections given for any publication if it reflects the true proceedings of the House. Nothing more, nothing less. There is no confusion at all. The privileges granted to the parliamentarians, legislators are not a blanket license to indulge in untoward incidents. It's an empty cache. There is no confusion at all. We all know that the present government had tried to dictate terms to the then prosecutor for filing a petition for withdrawal from prosecution under Section 321 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. In regard to the cases registered against them, some of the opposition MLAs for destruction of public property and for other allied offences under Indian Penal Code. The prosecutor who had declined to act according to the decree was transferred within a split second, and another pliable prosecutor was brought in who readily filed an application. The CJM court rightly dismissed the same, holding that there is no public interest involved in withdrawal from the prosecution. A revision petition came to be filed before the Honorable High Court. It also met with the same fate. A SLP was filed before the Honorable Supreme Court, and the Honorable Supreme Court also dismissed the same with some scathing remarks against the government. The do's are well enumerated in the Constitution, but the don'ts, even though not specifically mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, have to be interpreted necessarily in tune with the principles embodied in the Constitution, as well as the law of morality and propriety. I think I have consumed more time for more than what has been allotted to me. I apologize for the same. We have here with us Sri Basant Sir, who is now a doyen in the Supreme Court. We all know he was one of the most honest, erudite, fearless, and sophisticated judges in the High Court of Kerala. It was always a pleasure for all of us to argue a case briefs before him. I'm thanking the leaders of High Court for giving me an opportunity to introduce the topic, and I'm making room for Basant Sir to present the topic. We are all looking forward to hear more about the do's and don'ts of legislators and parliamentarians. Thanking all once again.
Megha.
Megha.
Thank you, sir.
Ah.
Thank you for your brief introduction. Friends, we were all waiting for this moment. Sri R. Basant, Senior Advocate of Supreme Court, as well as the former judge of Honorable High Court of Kerala, will address us. As you all know, he is one of the most sought after personalities in academic session as well as seminars, not only in Kerala, but also other parts of the country. It is with immense pleasure that I welcome Sri R. Basant sir to address us. Participants, please know that you can leave your questions in the chat box, which will be answered later. Sir, please.
Mr. President, and all the participants of this webinar, a very good morning to all of you. I'm so happy that I'm back with the lawyer crowd of the High Courts, which presence is always relished by me during my about a decade-long existence presence at the Kerala High Court. Well, I must congratulate the organizers of this program for having chosen a topic which is of great contemporary value. Take away the politics from it. I think it's what is more important is the content of law which is there in the topic that we are called upon to discuss today. I'll carefully avoid controversial political aspects from the short discussion that I will try to undertake. But it's very important that we understand what the privileges of the Indian legislature and legislators are, because that is the topic of contemporary importance. And it's very important that we as lawyers and law persons have a clearer idea of what are these privileges. Contextually, it is very important because tomorrow we are going to enter the 75th year of our journey of independence. It is very important for us that at this point of time, we turn back and see the path that we have already covered. We have made great strides in our march after attaining independence. Spectacular they are. There may be many who feel that it must have been quicker, more faster, more spectacular than what it is. That's a question of opinion. Well, there can be many who feel that the pace of progress, the pace of transformation from a feudal society to a modern knowledge society must have been much faster. I give it. I take it. That the point is well taken. But if you were to ask me, what is the most outstanding achievement, the most spectacular accomplishment of the Indian polity during the last 75 years of its existence as a free country, I would have no doubt, and I would readily say the survival of democracy is the most outstanding achievement of the polity over the last 75 years. This multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious country, when it attained independence, the prophets of doom had forecast that the union will disintegrate in a very short time. The Indian people will not be able to understand democracy, will not be able to practice democracy. But then, therefore, I say the most outstanding achievement that we have made during the 75 years of our existence is the survival of democracy. Survival by itself is a very negative virtue. It's not a positive virtue. But I believe, please look at the map, turn left, turn right, turn up, turn down. While democracy has floundered and failed all around us, we, the people of India, have been able to maintain it. And that is a big credit that we as Indians have achieved. It's therefore important that in the context when we are entering the 75th year, we have a look at the temples of democracy, the legislatures, and try to find out what the privileges of the legislators are. I think that's very, very important. And that is why I find it is contextually very important, not merely because of the Ajit judgment. Ajit judgment, you know, the latest judgment by the two-judge bench of the Supreme Court rendered by Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud. That becomes very important because it sets you thinking on the eve of your Diamond Jubilee celebration or the Indian independence. Well, democracy was defined, the Lincolnian expression of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I believe it's a little outdated today. Today, when you attempt to define democracy, I don't think you can define democracy in terms of governance only. What is important is, in a democratic country which existed as a democratic country for 75 years, it may be important to ascertain how democracy has percolated down. Periodic elections, change of governments, though indicative of the partial success of democracy, I would never think that that is the be-all and the end-all of a democracy. Today, democracy requires to be redefined, perhaps, and to say that democracy in a polity, in a country, in a society, is the acceptance of the principle that two heads are better than one. It is acceptance of the idea that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my idea can be improved, modified, transformed, changed, thrown away. Well, that is a democratic country where people, the polity, from the smallest of individuals to the first citizen of India, have this attitude of the mind where you think that two heads are better than one, and also that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my idea can be modified. Maybe your idea will improve my idea. And this, according to me, is the most important yardstick, touchstone on which success of a democracy can be ascertained. How much do we have democracy in our country? How much is this percolated down? Is there democracy in your dining table when the family members sit and discuss a matter? Is there democracy when you sit on the executive committee and of societies, clubs, when you sit on the board meetings and discuss something? Is there democracy when people sit down, the legislators sit down in the legislatures and discuss matters? Is there democracy even when a collegium discusses matters? Well, these are matters which, according to me, until democracy, the spirit of democracy trickles down into the grassroots of the dining tables, boardrooms, legislatures, and wherever discussion and the decision by by discussion takes place, until then, I'm afraid we have not been democratic. We cannot claim to be democratic. And therefore, as I told you, where we see democracy in action in terms of the Lincolnian definition of governance and democracy, the one place where I can see democracy working to the visibility of all is the legislatures. And in the legislatures, I find we have not mastered the dynamics or the methodology of putting two heads to come out with a better idea. Well, that is what must take place in the legislatures. Have you ever thought of why legislators were throwing mics at each other as they did once in the UP Assembly? Why the chapels were thrown at each other by the legislatures in some other assembly? Well, I believe that we have not mastered the dynamics or mechanics of throwing ideas at each other. We ought to learn how we throw ideas at each other. Now, an idea is thrown at you. You have an idea already. You take the idea, find out whether it is worthy of acceptance or consideration. If not, you reject it. If you think that idea is worthy, you think how my idea can be modified. That is the process of democracy, the process of putting your heads together. Two heads are better than one, and that operates when we have mastered the mechanics or dynamics of this of putting heads together to come out with a better idea. That is what is expected to be take place, happen in the parliament, in all the legislatures, undoubtedly. The privileges, powers, immunities granted to the legislators are not to give them a feeling of importance, that I am above the law, I have a lot of powers and privileges. That's not the purpose. The purpose undoubtedly is to impress upon them the fact that our legislatures must function properly, the legislatures must function properly and discharge its obligation, duty under the Constitution, under the laws. That is why they are conferred privileges. Privileges, powers, and immunities are not to give them a feeling of importance that we are above the rest of the people, we are a cut above the others, and that we have certain privileges, we have certain immunities, we have certain powers more than the others. I believe this is far from the purpose of conferment of PPI, powers, privileges, and immunities on the legislators. Indian legislatures must be floors where ideas are discussed without fear, without the fear of consequences, with absolute freedom of conscience. Your ability to use the floors of the legislature for that ultimate purpose of exchanging ideas, of criticizing an idea, of suggesting a better idea, this must be preserved very zealously. Well, if you look at the purpose of the PPI, powers, privileges, and immunities of legislatures, let us always understand the purpose is very clear. Indian legislatures must function properly and discharge the obligations that they have to the people in a country wedded to rule of law, where constitution is supreme and not even the legislature, not even the judiciary, not even the executive. See, what is important is that in a place of constitutional supremacy, in a country of constitutional supremacy, certain powers, privileges, and immunities are conferred on the legislators for things happening in the legislature, only in order to ensure that the democratic purpose is achieved. Well, I think this is very, very important before you take the first step to go to find out what those privileges are. Let me be very clear. Without an iota of doubt in my mind, I would reiterate that powers, privileges, and immunities are given, and the legislators are protected only to ensure that the functions of the legislature are discharged properly. Once we are clear in our mind about what this is, maybe we can go to the specific provisions relating to the PPIs conferred on the parliament and the state legislatures. We'll go back one by one. I know I'm not in a law class where I will read the section, the precedents, etc., etc. I'll minimize it to the level or the minimum extent possible. But then maybe we'll have to look at what are these privileges, powers, and immunities for the legislators under the Indian law as it is today. Ajit, when I say Ajit, you know, I'm referring to the latest decision, deals with that in detail. Of course, that was a lot of politics involved in that. You know, it was of certain allegedly improper acts done on the floor of the House, which led to a prosecution and led to a withdrawal. We are not concerned with all that, with great respect. In this very academic discussion that we are involved in, we are primarily concerned with the nature, the contours of the PPI of the Indian legislators, including parliament and the legislative assemblies all over, assemblies, councils all over. This is what we have to. Well, I would now request you to kindly have an idea of what these are, where do we find, where do we locate the privileges, the powers, privileges. I think it's enough. I'll not take you through all the details. I would just say that just 2 articles of the Constitution, Article 105, which deals with the PPI or the parliamentarians, and Article 194, which deals with the PPI or the state legislatures. I think they are pari materia, they are exactly identically worded, and therefore we can have a look at that and find out what are these powers and privileges of the Indian legislators, parliamentarians, and assembly members included, right? Well, say Article 105 of the Constitution has 4 specific and different parts. You must all be knowing this. Only in context, I'm trying to refer to this. Article 105 starts with a subchapter heading of powers, privileges, and the immunities of parliamentarians. I'll not repeat parliamentarians and state legislators. It's all the same, and therefore I'll only refer to them as parliamentarians, all of them included, right? Now, Article 105, it's all 4 sections are all 4 sub-articles are identical, and therefore we will refer to 105. And 105.1 first of all says that, 1 minute, maybe I will refer to the section, the article itself, so that I do not make any mistake in doing this. 105 and 194.1 will start by saying, subject to the provisions of the Constitution and the rules and so on, so on. So there shall be freedom of speech in Parliament. I started by saying, look at the purpose of the conferment of the privileges. Call this the power or the privilege. Privilege you will have, or the power you will have of freedom of speech in Parliament. You have the absolute freedom of speech in Parliament. Why? Do not me as an Indian citizen have a right of freedom of speech, fundamental right of freedom of speech? Why is it is declared afresh in Article 105.1, 194.1? What is the purpose? Well, this has been the subject matter of discussion. Even in Ajit, you will find some reference to that. It is true that every Indian citizen has the fundamental right of speech under Article 19, but their lordships try to explain it by saying, when it came to 105.1, the freedom of speech declared is absolute. In the sense, you are not, by the restrictions possible under 19.2, may not apply to a legislature. Correct? Looking at the purpose of it, the right of my elected representative must be untrammeled. It should not be fettered. He must have an absolute right of a power of expression. He must have the power of the privilege of freedom of speech, absolute terms. And that is why even in Ajit it is said that what is already declared in Article 19 for a citizen has been redeclared in 105.1, and the purpose is only to make sure that the power of the legislator to speak in Parliament his freedom of speech is qualitatively larger and more, wider in its purport and amplitude, that his right to speech is not fettered by anything. On the floor of the parliament, he has the absolute power to am I audible? Is there any problem?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Clear, huh? Clear. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yes,
I
yes.
saw some notification. So the power of the privilege of freedom of speech reiterated in 105.1 vis-a-vis, which is already there for an Indian citizen under 19, points to the accent of the Constituent Assembly, the Constitution, to make sure that the power of free speech in Parliament knows no restriction at all. You have the power of speech there. Of course, I'll come to some exceptions, which must definitely be read into it later on when the legislative functions, non-legislative functions, etc., are considered. But leave that as it may. The purpose of the freedom of speech redeclared in Article 105.1 without the concomitant restrictions of a similar right for the citizen under Article 19 in 19.2 and proviso is to make sure that my representative in Parliament has the absolute right to fearlessly to speak in Parliament, fearlessly represent me in Parliament, fearlessly speak on behalf of his constituency in Parliament or the people of India in the Parliament without any restrictions on his right of speech. Well, this is the first one. Always try to link it with the purpose of existence of the legislature in a democracy. What is the floor of the House is expected to be made use of in what manner? Please understand that when you read 105.1. 105.2, we don't have much time. I'll quickly skip. A lot more can be said about 105.1, but or the freedom of speech, absolute in terms, how absolute it is. We can embark on a discussion on that, but maybe that's not necessary for the limited purpose and the time that is available for us. 105.2 is again a very important provision. I would call 105.2 not a power or privilege, but an immunity. 105.2 is an immunity granted to the parliamentarians. Now, just let me read to you that and then it'll be interesting. No member of parliament shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or any vote given in the parliament. That is the first part of Article 105.2. It saves them from courts, be they criminal or civil. It saves them of the obligation to account for or to explain their stand in parliament to a limited extent of whatever has been said or any vote given in parliament. It's a very qualified immunity. It's not a blanket immunity at all. It only says that you are sure of this. What is that? Whatever anything said or any vote given in parliament, you will not have to go and stand before a court and explain it. Whatever you have said in parliament, you don't have to explain in any court. Whatever vote you have done in parliament, you don't have to go and explain to any court. This is the first part of Article 105.2 and 194.2 also, which gives a lot of courage and confidence for my chosen representative to speak in parliament, because anything that he says there, anything that is said, he will not be answerable to any court of law, be it civil or criminal. For any vote given, also he will not be liable. He doesn't have to account or explain to the court why he said something in a particular way, or why he voted in a particular way, or what prompted him to vote in a particular way, what prompted him to speak in a particular way. He doesn't have to explain at all. That, according to me, is an immunity for what is said in parliament, and anything that is said in parliament, or anything that is any vote given in parliament. So far as these two are concerned, you can find an absolute immunity. I would call it an absolute immunity because whatever is said, because what is your duty? It is your duty to speak on behalf of your people. And if you speak on behalf of a people in parliament, you are not answerable to any court. It's your duty to vote in favor or against propositions. And if you vote in a one particular manner, you don't have to account or explain to any court of the land. And therefore, 105.2, according to me, first part gives my chosen representative a great confidence in that he will not be held up before any court for anything said or any vote given in the legislature. Well, so much of it is very clear. The 105.2 as a second part, and I don't think I'll take my time considering the limited time that I have, of that he will not be answerable for any publication of that made and or the proceedings made. Of course, importance of the word proceedings do come up, but then I'm not going to. All regarding a publication of what is done in the parliament for these rights, anything that is said, any vote that is given. And any proceedings of parliament, any publication made also for that which has the sanction or the permission of the house, he doesn't have to explain. This is what 105.2 says. I should have said, yes, 105.2 says. I will now, as I go forward to you, I will take you to the decision in Narasimha Rao, where this question was considered. You know, I'll refer to that later. That was a case where certain persons were alleged to have voted in favor or against a no confidence motion because they were bribed. The question was, the vote in parliament was because of the bribe. Was he answerable under the PC Act to a court for this? That was the question. That was the short question. Now, it has been held by a very razor-thin majority, 2 versus 2, and the third one moving up and down. The 5 judgment ultimately said, no, he is not liable to account for the vote given by him. And giving it the largest possible interpretation, they said the allegation that it was for money that was done, he is not answerable to any court at all. That is what Narasimha Rao said. I'll take you through that a little later when I come to that part of it. And finally, okay, we have covered 102.2 also. Now 102.3 is, according to me, very important. 102.3 says, it's interesting. What it, in short, I am not trying to read it, what it says, in other respects, because 1 and 2 we have already seen. He will have absolute freedom of speech in parliament. 1, 2, that he will not be liable to answer to any court for anything said or vote given in parliament. Right? Once, in respect of any other, in other respects, the PPI, powers, privileges, and immunity of each house, is to be determined by itself by law. 2 of them non-negotiable, that is available, whether there's a law for that point or not. For 1 and 2, 105, 1 and 2 are available to every legislature. The power of absolute freedom of speech and the immunity for being held up in a court for anything said or vote given, that is already given. You need not look for any law. But for the others, in respect to the others, which is in the domain of legislation by the respective house, the parliament or the house, they can legislate on their powers. I'll just take you through that because it may be of some importance. In other respects, the PPI of each house of parliament, or the members and the committees of each house, shall be such as may from time to time be defined by parliament by law. Our legislatures at all the 72 years after we became a constitutional republic, about 70, 71, 72 years to enact legislations by which they could have said they could have protected themselves. So far, such a law has not been codified. Still, we are dependent on observations by courts, etc. But be that as it may, what it ultimately says is, you have the power to legislate and say what your privileges, powers, privileges, and immunities are. 105, 1 and 2 are yours. Nobody disputes. But when it comes to 105, 3, what it says is, it is for the legislatures to define by law. 105, 194, read them, it's the same. It says you can legislate and define the contours of your, in respect of the other matters, you can have such powers. You can determine by law. You can determine by law. That is what it said. Our legislatures have not so far defined these privileges. They could have had more. Well, supposing we feel that there are certain more rights that must be given to them, like, for example, to take anything done in parliament cannot be the subject matter of any proceeding before court, they could have made the law, and then they would have been protected. They could have always said that in exercise of 105(3), we have enacted a law which said that whatever happens on the floor of the house, we will have immunity or subject to the sanction of the speaker to make it more acceptable. I don't want it to go before a bench of bench and say it goes against the basic structure of the Constitution. Well, subject to restrictions of a speaker granting permission for, they could have enacted a law which says anything that happens in parliament will be the exclusive domain of the speaker, and it's only the speaker who can decide that. Otherwise, we all have immunity subject to lifting of that immunity by the speaker. Till today, such a law has not been made. Hats off to your legislators that they did not think of enacting a law which protected them absolutely for whatever happened in parliament. And if such a law were there today, you would not have been able to prosecute them. Subject to, of course, the constitutional challenge against such an extreme provision, if it is an extreme one. What it means is the law has not been codified or the privileges so far. Powers, privileges, and immunities can be enacted by that house itself, by law. But that has not been done. So what happens? Because there is no law, is it that they have no powers, privileges, and immunities other than 1 and 2? Other than, we have referred to 105, 1 and 2, which are non-negotiable, which is already there, whether a statute is there or not. 3 says, in other respects, you can make the law. This respective house can make the law. Now you have not made the law. What happens? Are you without any power, any other powers or privileges or immunities? And that is where the second part of section 105(3) becomes important and says, it has undergone amendments. Now, earlier it said, I'll just read to you. So defined, the privileges of mayor and of the members of the committees of houses shall be such as may from time to time be defined by the parliament by law. The next part is the second part, and until so defined shall be those that those of that house and of its members and committees immediately before the coming into force of section 15 of the Constitution 44th Amendment Act. This is some legislature history behind it, some constitutional history behind it. When it was originally enacted and came into force on the 26th of January 1950, it said, until the Indian houses make law relating to, in other respects, to their powers, privileges, and immunities, those will be that of the House of Commons in England. Well, again, an uncodified law, but it vaguely said that all the legislators and the legislatures shall have the same powers, privileges, and immunities which the British House of Commons had when the Constitution came into force. So that sets us on an inquiry or a roving inquiry as to what the rights of the British House of Commons was when it came into existence, as it stood when the Constitution came into existence, right? I'll repeat, Parliament can make the law in respect of other matters, but even if you have not made the law, you will be protected and you will have the same powers, privileges, and immunities which the British House of Commons had on the date when the Indian Constitution came into force. That sets you on an inquiry as to what rights and privileges the British parliamentarians had on the date when the Constitution of India came into force. You will find a classic analysis in Ajit about that also. I'll come to that. So what happens is, Parliament or the legislatures have not made any law under 105(3). And so they on the date when the Constitution came into force, they had the powers, privileges, and immunities of the British parliamentarian on the date when the Constitution came into existence. That when the amendments came in 76, an amendment came, 78, an amendment came, and in 78 amendment it says your powers shall be same as those that you had on the date on which the in 1978 the 44th Constitution Amendment came into force. Because then you definitely had the powers of the British Parliament on the date when the Constitution came, and whatever flowed from between 1950 and 1978 but Indian courts interpretations, that will also be there for you, is what is stated in the Act. Well, it is very important that we understand this clause 3, which has two definite and specific parts. One, that you can legislate on your powers, privileges, and immunities. Nothing, to my knowledge, no legislature has attempted a codification. There have been attempts, but no one has come out with a law codifying the privileges of the Indian Parliament and the other legislatures. It has not been done. And then you will have to identify what the powers of the British parliamentarian was in 1950 when the Constitution came, and 50 to 78, whatever further rights the Indian parliamentarians, Indian legislators had, that will also be theirs until you make the law on that point. Well, this you will find is the law. Is the only place where the law is found. And I'm not taking you to the do's and don'ts of don't discuss the conduct of judges here. And we are not concerned with that. That is all restrictions on the business that can be carried on by Parliament. There is one more clause in 105(4). I will not take my time for that. It only says whatever privileges the legislators have, the same privileges will be there for people who are invited, who are permitted to speak in the House and in the committees. Yeah, that is all that it says. That's not, again, not very important. Now in Ajit, the court came and was stuck with the situation. What are the powers of the parliamentarians? Do you have a right to indulge in criminal acts and immunity therefrom? Well, even Ajit did not consider that, but I think it will be relevant for you to see the nature of immunity granted to the president, governors, and Raja Pramukhs under Article 361 of the Constitution. An absolute protection was given to them, where it said, shall not be answerable to any court for exercise and performance of the powers, duties for any act done or purporting to be done. Then it also said that no criminal proceedings whatsoever shall be instituted or continued against the president or the governor of the state in any court during his term of office. Where the Constitution wanted to give more specific immunity, taking them away from the courts altogether, they were expressed in better, clearer language, as can be seen from Article 361. The Constitution did not choose to confer such blanket powers, blanket immunities to a legislator in the Indian context. And therefore, the immunity which the legislators have are not absolute and are not absolute, as we can see in 361, perhaps completely taking away their. It's not, no absolute power. Well, Justice Chandrachud, the bench, the two-judge bench in that decision was called upon to find out what are the powers of the British powers, privileges, immunities of the British parliamentarian on the date when the Constitution came into force and whatever changed from 50 to 78. It's very interesting. Their lordship, the two-judge bench, has gone into that question in detail. Actually, they relied on 3 decisions of the English courts. You please read that. You know, I can't explain that. It'll take a lot of time. I think I'm already about 45 minutes being taken now. 1 hour of the time given to me, and therefore you can read para 38 of Ajit, which deals with the decision in R versus Elliott. 39, which deals with R versus Bradlaugh, and para 41, which deals with R versus Chateau. Please go through those decisions and the summing up which is available in para 44. So, well, I think we cannot attempt to do it better than that. The court very clearly says, very contextually refers to that and says in para 44 of Ajit, that from the above cases, these are 3 other cases that are referred to, English decisions, it is evident that a person committing a criminal offense within the precincts of the House does not hold an absolute privilege. Instead, he would possess a qualified privilege and would receive the immunity only if the action bears nexus to the effective participation of the member in the House. Right? Para 44 sums up the privileges or the powers or the immunity of the British parliamentarian on the date when the Constitution of India came into force, which was what they were given by the second part of section 100, article 105(3). Right, and therefore, even if you go by the British parliamentarians' privileges and immunities, you are not covered. You don't have an absolute privilege, but only a qualified privilege when criminal offenses happen to be committed. In the sense, it must be integrally connected, the nexus to the effective participation of the member in the House, as a member in the House. Now, unless that is there, you will not have a privilege, even on the powers, PPIs of a British parliamentarian on the date when the Indian Constitution came into force. Well, having said that, the court then proceeds to consider what is the position under the Indian law. 3 decisions appear to me to be crucial and vital. There are many others which may be incidentally relevant, but first would be the Narasimha Rao judgment, to which I briefly referred to when I stated earlier. That is one. I'll give the 3 decisions. This Narasimha Rao judgment is by a 5-judge bench. It is 2 plus 2 plus 1. 2 held in favor, 2 held against. The dictum or the ratio had to be decided by analyzing the judgment of the 5th person, and in that the 5th man agreed half in one, agreed half in the other, and it was held that in respect of a vote given in Parliament, I repeat, in respect of a vote given in Parliament, he is not answerable under the PC Act. That was the dictum. The 2 plus 2, 2 versus 2, the last one agreed with this part of the dictum, and therefore it was held that in respect of a vote given, that was a vote given in the no confidence motion, and it was evident that he gave, it was alleged perhaps that he gave the vote against the no confidence motion because of certain alleged corruption, and the court said we have anguish, but we have to protect the right of the parliamentarian for a vote given by him in Parliament, and therefore he is not liable to be hauled up before a court in a prosecution under the PC Act. Well, the 2 others agreed again, it was held against it, but that is a minority dictum, and that is not acceptable now. But incidentally, I will have to tell you that in a later decision of Sita Soren, which was passed by a 3-judge bench in 7/3/19. This dictum in Narasimha Rao is doubted and is referred to a larger bench, just by way of information. As I did some research, I found it was not there. This Narasimha Rao, whether it will be accepted or not, is an open question in the reference made under Sita Swaran as early as in 7/3/19. Going by that, Narasimha Rao was a 5-judge bench. A larger bench may have to be constituted. It has not been constituted. And as of today, as is well settled, Narasimha Rao dictum 2 + 2 and the +1 later, that +1, 3 goes to this side. And therefore, for a vote given, even the BC Act will not be applicable. The immunity extends to a vote given also, whatever may have been the persuasions of having given the vote. That is the dictum in Narasimha Rao that stands now. As it is, it stands now. Well, there was another question as to whether the sanction of the speaker ought to be obtained or not. Now that has been held to be, the sanction of the speaker of the Rajya Sabha or the Lok Sabha ought to be obtained. That is, and he is to be informed, and his permission is to be obtained, is the law. There are also 2 held in one way, 2 held in another way. But the 5th man, who in the first part half held in favor of the former 2, in the latter half held in favor of the former latter 2, and therefore that is what Narasimha Rao says. Narasimha Rao, according to me, is a clear attempt to interpret 105(2), Article 105(2), and it says, for anything said or any vote given, he has an absolute protection, is an absolute immunity, right? Then came the next decision of relevance, according to me, in our context, is the decision in, what is that decision called? R.S. Dayal, Ripu Sudan Dayal, Justice Ripu Sudan Dayal, Lok Ayukta, that case. Find out that case. It is referred to by Ajit's judgment in para 57. Para 51 and 52 speaks of that. Just incidentally, that was a case where Lok Ayukta found that certain constructions made by the legislature was vitiated by bribe, vitiated by corruption. Lok Ayukta wanted to look into it. When the Lok Ayukta started looking into it, the legislature secretariat issued a notice to them saying that you are indulging in contempt. And therefore, the matter went before the Supreme Court to decide under Article 32 whether their protection would extend to this sort of a situation. And that is where, I'm not going to take you through the details, in Ripu Sudan Dayal, what the court held, you can see in para 57 of the Ajit decision, para 57, there it says, you have to make a distinction between essential legislative functions and non-essential legislative functions, and the protection would apply only to legislative functions. So very interesting. It said non-legislative functions, the immunity is not available, is what was said. Lot to be said about that decision, because basically it was against the secretary of the legislature that the action emanated, action was initiated, and therefore a lot of area where there could be difference. Just for your understanding, read paragraphs 51 and 52 of the decision, which is extracted in page 57 of Ajit. I repeat, that's a 3-judge bench decision where the essential and non-essential legislative functions were distinguished and said the protection will be available only for legislative functions stricto sensu. Then comes our Ajit, the latest decision, which is causing a lot of ripples in the legal, constitutional, and political circles in this country as to what it means, what can be said about it. Well, the dictum perhaps is very simple. It doesn't go beyond what has been said in the other decisions about interpretation of 105 or 194. It doesn't say much more than that. It accepts, perhaps in greater clarity, it lays down that 105(1) freedom of speech is not qualified by 19(2) provisos. That is very important, so that the right of speech in Parliament and vote given in Parliament is absolute. It's an absolute privilege. It's perhaps reiterated and held in Ajit. That is the legal significance of the judgment so far as 105(1) is concerned. Now, in that case, another question was raised. May not be a parliamentary privilege as can be spelled out from 105 or 194, but 197 CRPC must apply to us. And therefore, you cannot prosecute us unless you get the sanction of the speaker as contemplated under Narasimha Rao. Narasimha Rao said that maybe they are not removable from office. They are not people removable from office by the government. They are removable not even by the people who have elected them under the Indian law as it now stands. There's no right of recall as JP canvassed for it. There's no right of recall, and therefore nobody can remove them. And therefore, sanction, concept of sanction is alien to a legislator who is not removable from office under as contemplated under 197, and therefore this decision held that 197 will also not apply. So what is done in the legislative house, a misconduct unrelated to parliamentary functions, indulgent on the floor of the house, not even 197 is applicable, has been held clearly in. And the reason for that is that you are not removable from office by the state or central government. If Narasimha Rao would say that sanction of the speaker must be obtained for prosecuting a person under the PC Act, he is also not removable. Anything to me, or was that anything being said?
No, sir.
Sorry. I thought somebody wanted to ask me something. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for that interruption. Now, so they said Narasimha Rao was not considering 197. It was only considering section 19 sanction under the BC Act. That is differently worded. That it has been held that 19 sanction must come from the speaker does not automatically follow that 197 sanction must be obtained from the speaker. So that 197 protection was also denied to them. Well, the question therefore is the representative of the people answerable for what he does on the floor of the house? I remind you, despite an opportunity, 105(3) article powers have not been invoked to bring in a legislation. If a legislation had been brought about that for any act done in the presence of the parliament, on the floor of the parliament, the legislator will have immunity, or he can be prosecuted only with the sanction of the speaker, that the situation would have been entirely different. Such a legislation is not there, and therefore we have to go by what the latter part of 105(3) says as to whether until you make a law on that aspect, your powers, privileges, immunities will be as governed by the British parliamentarian on the date of the coming into the constitution and thereafter. And the British parliamentarian does not have the powers. How can, in a country where parliament is supremacy, the criminal acts on the floor of the house are not protected, how can you claim it in the Indian context where constitution and not parliament is supreme? Right? Very interesting question. Very interesting questions because no, I will say that also. I don't know how right I am. The manner in which the Indian legislatures function, we find people rushing into the well of the house for the silliest of excuses. Be it the ruling party, be it the opposition, when today they are here, tomorrow they are here, whoever they are, they indulge in this. They indulge in acts which are contrary to norms of acceptable behavior in throwing to pieces the bill which the minister is about to present. They obstruct the proceedings of the parliament by standing up on the tables. Well, I'm quoting examples which does not come within your immediate dispute. I don't want to. That prosecution is pending. They throw mics at each other. Well, for those, can they be prosecuted? Should they have protection for this? This has become a common occurrence in the Indian legislatures. I was perhaps a little perturbed to say, somebody speaking in parliament to say, don't reduce parliament to the Kerala Legislative Assembly. I was very upset to hear that the most literate polity in India being forced to hear such a derogatory remark on the floor of the parliament. But let me tell you that this has become daily occurrence in our people pushing the wardens, people jumping up to the well of the house. These have all become normal now. Should our parliamentarians have immunity for these? I may say no, you may say yes, and therefore it depends upon the nature of the alleged culpable conduct, and it must have a nexus to the immunity. If you think there's nothing wrong in persons from one side of the house rushing towards the man speaking from the other side and showing gestures at him, do you think that must be protected? Do you think that will also be incident of a right of speech? Do you think whether incident of the right of speech or otherwise, under the first half of 103, we must make a legislation which would protect the legislatures? It's a question of opinion. That is where the opinion comes. That is where people are trying to defend conduct which may apparently appear to be unacceptable, going by refined norms of behavior, but the same thing will apply. If you stand up on the table of the house, if you rush to the well, if you push the warden, if you show dangerous gestures at the opposition member who's speaking, this will all be not strictly relevant to the conduct, to the function of the legislature. Should those acts be given protection? Now we have a very extreme act, destruction of public property, etc. I don't want to enter into that. That's a different question. But the issue really involved may not be such extreme behavior. It may apply to non-essential legislative business transacted, which may otherwise be culpable. Will a person get protection for that or not? That's a big question which you'll have to consider. And I would think if the legislators are intelligent, if they are pragmatic, they would immediately come out with a law with retrospective effect, saying that whatever has happened now, it may happen, happened already, hereafter happened. We make a legislation which says prosecution on the floor of the house will be only with the permission of the speaker, with the sanction of the speaker. And if that sanction is not obtained, whether cognizance has already been taken or it is yet to be taken, now you shall not proceed with that. Well, the question whether it will augur well with the basic structure is a different question altogether. That's a different question altogether. But then an intelligent legislative assembly, if they want to protect their members, must come out with a legislation under the first part of section 102, 105(3) and legislate that this will be protected. No court shall take cognizance without the sanction of the speaker. And if cognizance has already been taken, proceedings will stand, and it will be only with the sanction that will proceed further. Forget about the basic structure doctrine. Yeah, that's a different matter. Basic structure doctrine also, I feel it is high time that we have a restriction on the understanding of the basic structure doctrine. A constitutional amendment sanctioned by the ratification by all is decided by a 5-judge bench. I think it's time that we decide that at least in such epoch-making consequences resulting matters, the full court, the entire court, or at least a substantial board of the court must sit to decide whether the basic structure doctrine is offended or not. It's too much to give that power to an ordinary constitution bench or even a slightly larger bench is my humble view. That's incidental, purely incidental. We are not on that at all. But then, if the legislature wants to avoid the consequences for its members who according to them are guilty only of misbehavior in exercise of their right of protest, what happens if they make a law under the first part of section 100 article 105.3 and then say that without the sanction of the speaker, no court shall take cognizance of any matter that has happened on the floor of the house? Because 105.3 gives them the jurisdiction and authority to define by law. Your option to question the law notwithstanding. Well, it's very interesting questions are very simple. As a democratic country, citizen of a democratic country, I do want my legislators to have an uninhibited right of conduct in the legislative houses. They should not be asked to stand before courts for what they have done before the legislature, normally. But if you indulge in grossly improper conduct, unbecoming of your duties and functions, essential functions, legislative functions, there must be an opening to prosecute subject to a sanction. Who decides? Who decides that? I believe there could be no one better than the speaker to decide that. Well, a speaker may be a prisoner of his political party. That is also possible. But then you have to give the jurisdiction to someone. To prosecute a police officer under 197, sanction is being given by the head of the Home Department. And therefore, you can't say that that by itself would vitiate the provision relating to sanction. Well, it's time. I believe it is time that the Indian legislatures, parliament, and the state assemblies included start thinking on the lines of the first part of 105.3 and think of enacting legislation prospective or retrospective. I leave it there. I leave it there. To decide whether what are the protection that a legislator must have. Yes, in the heat of passion, he does something. Should he be prosecuted? He indulges in wanton conduct. Should he not be prosecuted? Well, it's a very interesting question. I don't think it is capable of a very oversimplistic answer. It requires detailed consideration, and I think we will have to come out with answers for the same. I would certainly feel that mere irregularities of behavior, mere improprieties of behavior may have to be on the floor of the House in the course of a discussion or in the course of a protest raised, will have to be distinguished from grossly culpable conduct on the floor of the legislature. And the best way perhaps would be the master of the proceedings to give sanction for prosecution. Well, I know that I've sometimes swung to the extreme, but as a member of a democratic polity, I don't want my legislators to come before courts and wait for conduct on the floor of the House, which according to them is justified by the gravity of the situation, which according to many others are not satisfied. There must be some provision by which there is a wholesome, pragmatic way of resolving the controversy. And in my humble thinking, I think sanction by the speaker to register an FIR or to take cognizance would be a possible solution to the problem that we face. If for every improper conduct which may amount to a criminal offense, like as I said, for example, the leader of the opposition is making a speech. Some people on the treasury benches do not like that. They run to him and show dangerous gestures which may amount to assault. Can he be prosecuted? Should he be prosecuted? Instead, as in the example which Justice Dhananjay pointed out, the heat of passion, a person takes out the pistol and fires at the other. Should that be protected as immunity? Well, the golden mean appears to be not at either of these extreme points. There ought to be a method by which we can resolve this and say that certain conduct would be culpable. You will have to face prosecution. Immunity under 102, 105, 2 will not extend to that. But there must be a method by which innocuous, non-serious variations of ideal behavior do not lead to prosecution of my legislators. I'm interested in that. I'm interested as an ordinary citizen. I'm interested in they transacting business without the fear of standing before a court tomorrow. Well, if they shoot, yes, they have to. And no speaker would refuse to give permission for that. Well, as I always say, the purpose of any discussion is to provoke thoughts. And my endeavor has been only that. The answer which some of us think as a solution for the problem is not as simple as we think or make it appear to be. There are very serious issues involved. And therefore, the matter requires consideration, and the option available under section 105(3) cannot be squandered. And this is the time to act, come out with a legislation which would amply protect the Indian legislators in the Indian context, where tearing of the bill is common today. My sense of, what shall I say? My sense of propriety is not very much wounded today when I see that on the Kerala Legislative House, somebody tried to introduce a bill and somebody went and tore it to pieces. Now, maybe I have got used to it now. But for some others, it may be very objectionable conduct amounting to a culpable conduct not protected by the essential legislative functions. Well, if I have succeeded in making you think on these lines and not simply accept a judgment that has been rendered, I think I have done my brief today properly. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to have this, to be part of the discussion with you. Thank you.
So words fail to express our deep sense of gratitude for the pains that you have taken, sir. It was really a scholarly approach to the topic and a wonderful experience for all the participants. We will remain indebted to you forever, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to invite, some participants have seek permission for asking question. I think George Zakaria sir had some questions. Sir, please, George sir.
Yes, sir.
I will be very clear on one aspect. There is no question and answer. There's only discussion. I don't think I can answer the question, frankly, because I myself am in doubt in many areas, and therefore I thought I tried to show one path which is available. I have no final answers for anything that I have said. And therefore we will discuss. Don't call it a question and answer. You say or the remarks or responses. That will be a better one. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Please.
It's not a question. It's not a question at all. It's only also participating in the discussion. I am very glad to hear on the definition you have at the initial stage, at the initial time. You were defining democracy itself from this definition we are having. Actually, I am also joining with that. Actually, according to me, since I being a student of political science, always I think I am a political science student, and I think it is not a concept or a mode of administration. Democracy is it is an attitude, as you have already stated. So it's a mindset that must be it is the best definition for democracy. Therefore, while coming to this aspect of legislative privileges also, that concept of democracy is to be considered for defining or explaining this thing also, I think. And my only point which I wanted to point out here is, sir, you were comparing 19.2 with the 195.1 section, article 19.2 with 195.1 at the initial stage. while going through both those provisions, 19.2 says many things, though it is 19.2 says about restrictions, and the restrictions is on very many aspects regarding if anything which is happening in the any speech or any anything made in the parliament or in the legislature which affects the foreign relations, then or decency and morality, on those all things restrictions have been put in as per such Article 19.2. But when it is compared with the 195.1, my doubt, it is not a doubt, I think, will it amount to an argument that since there is no imposition of restriction as per 195.1 as in 19.2, whether those things which are restricted in 19.2 are permissible in 195.1, whether such a doubt or will there an argument will be raised by somebody that since there is no restriction as per 19.2 in 195.1, all those things will are restricted in accordance with 19.2 can be possible in 195.1.
Well, very relevant doubt, very relevant thinking. I think if you read Ajit in detail, it very clearly says that the restrictions under 19.2 may not apply to the freedom of speech contemplated under 105.1 and 194.1. Now, I think there is a reason for this also, because if it transgresses anything, the trust or faith in the legislature is such that the speaker would not allow it to go on record. Now, if it does not go on record, it cannot be published by anyone. So there is an inherent built-in safeguard against that. Now, I'm sure you see, I didn't have time to explain 102 latter, 105.2 latter part says only certain publications are protected, which has gone into the records of the House with the authority of the Speaker, with the authority of the House. If somebody makes, see, for example, a person is entitled to argue that sedition laws cannot be enforced. Certain acts are not seditions. Now, if the Speaker feels that they would cross the limits of permissible discussion, Speaker would not allow that question to go, allowed to become part of the proceedings. To publish which, you will not have the protection under the latter half of 105.2. And that is, otherwise, you please look at it this way. Every citizen has the right of freedom of speech under 19. Why is it reiterated in so far as the discussions on the floor of the House are concerned? There is some distinction, definitely. And therefore, I'm tempted to agree with the view in Ajit. And it's to some extent reflected in earlier, but more clearly reflected in this, that the 19.2 restrictions may not apply to what is said in anything that is said in Parliament. Of course, if you want to claim the protection, you must get it only. Shall I read that to you just for a minute? So that a very interesting question. It disturbed me also when I read it first. And that is why I want you to see that. See, it says, no member of the legislature, 105.2, no member of the legislature of the state shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or any vote given by him in the legislature or committee thereof. And no person shall be so liable in respect of the publication by or under the authority of a house of such legislature in any paper, in any report, paper, votes or proceedings. So what is given the authority, a publication by or under the authority of the House is given protection, not others. Others will end on the floor itself, it will not go out. That must be the purpose. And the language of 105.1 and 19, very important. If the legislature has only those powers which a citizen has under 19, why should it be repeated there? Right? And therefore, the purpose is important. Purpose is a fearless airing of opinion, undeterred by the possibility of a prosecution. That is what is meant. And that is why perhaps it says, Ajit very clearly says, 19.2 restrictions are not applicable to what is anything that is said on the floor of the House under Article 105.1. Appears to be a very plausible explanation to me, though initially it raises some doubts. Can you defame me? No, if that is the question. Can you defame me? Can you speak about the integrity of India? Well, even that is protected under 105.1 is what I like to say. Supposing a person speaks in Parliament tomorrow that Kashmir people are entitled to liberty, you cannot prosecute him for sedition outside. You may criticize him on the floor of the House. The speaker or whoever is in chair may say, this will not form part of the records. So that publication of that will not give him anyone any protection. But his right to say whatever he wants to say is protected and not controlled by 19.2. I think it's a good interpretation. I accepted it ultimately, even though I had a doubt, as you said, when I started reading it first.
But sir, one more thing. So if it is so, won't it be necessary to have some restrictions? Otherwise, if then, especially with regard to some foreign relations, as it is said in 19.2, if some parliamentarians making some statements in the parliament regarding.
Very good, good doubt. Let me ask you. Tomorrow, I feel that this Indian difference of opinion with China are not good. It serves the interests of India or Pakistan. You may take any country, or US or Afghanistan, whichever. I feel that a better way to deal with this is not to fight with them, but to make peace with them. Government of India is doing wrong in picking up a fight against them. Is he not entitled to say that Parliament? Where else is he going to say that? See, if you say that he cannot say that, are you not stifling the voice of dissent? 19.2 I can understand. But on the floor of the Parliament, if I can't say that, where am I going to say that?
That's there.
Right? You know, think in those lines. I think you get a clarity on the subject. No, this is how I try to satisfy my doubt about your question. Right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Always you are, even in courts also, you are encouraging discussions. I remember today also I got that answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
So, can I have?
Oh yes, who's that? Samir.
Vineet, sir.
Vineet. I am Vineet, sir.
Vineet, sorry. I thought, sorry. Yes, Vineet, tell me.
Sir, the very purpose of the protection or the privileges given to the legislators is that he should be able to speak freely. He should be performing his duties freely as a legislator, someone.
Right. Oh, no, easy, yeah. Okay, please. Tell me.
He could perform without fear, and he could speak freely for the people he represents.
Right. Right, I agree.
That being so,
yeah.
a ruckus, if that being so, any ruckus, any obstruction made by a member of the parliament or an assembly against another member, what would be? That would be a conflict of with the rights of the other member who also is trying to represent his voice or his people.
He can. I don't think, this may be an objectionable conduct, but he can certainly do that. No, that is why I said.
My question, no, the immunity by a legislation or something, that anything done on the floor of the House is immune. Nobody could question. So that by such acts, you are also protecting, you are also offending the rights of the other member, the very member of that House.
You are talking about speech. The earlier question by George Sekaria was about speech. You are talking about violent acts.
Yes. Violent acts or any obstruction.
I have no doubt that they will be liable for. There will be crimes and that will be actionable. Only thing is whether some sort of immunity or regulation by sanction would be necessary by a law under 3 of Article 102 is the only question. Nobody would say you can go and beat. Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud asked a question. Now I am speaking something against you. You pull out your gun and shoot me. Am I to suffer that? That is not. Nobody would support that. Nobody would ever with his head on his shoulders would support that it is not a crime. That's not the point. It's not the point at all. Tell me. No problem. I'm just trying to
No,
understand.
no, the immunity provided. What about the conflict with his opinion with the other opinion? So one person is saying, I am protected. I am protected by whatever I am doing, not the violence.
Whatever I am saying, not doing.
Whatever I'm saying.
Yeah, because anything done or vote given is alone as immunity as of now, right?
Thank you, sir.
So let me ask you.
Please, sir.
Okay, I have a hypothetical question in connection with the discussion of those Sakriya sir also, sir. So suppose A is a male parliamentarian
Yes,
and B is a female parliamentarian.
very good.
During the question of hours in the parliament,
Yeah,
A had used some abusive word against B.
Yeah.
Speaker interfered
yes,
and it became out of recorded from the Sabha register.
right.
But some public has downloaded this footage as it is a live streaming.
Yeah,
And after some years, after the tenure of both A and B as parliamentarian, now both of them are not parliamentarian. These footage become widespread in social medias. At that stage, B had given a criminal complaint against A, claiming that A is against all these. In that point, whether A will get an absolute immunity regarding this, as it is something happened during the parliament, as I hear, he have a parliamentary privilege.
well, parliamentary privilege, as I understand it, parliamentary privilege or the legislator's privilege is not restricted by time, as in the case of 361 by the president and the governors. President and governors, for whatever they have done already, cannot be prosecuted while they are in office, and thereafter they can be prosecuted. So far as the parliamentarians are concerned, their protection is not dependent on whether they continue to be parliamentarians or not. Their protection for what they have done, if available, is available when they are parliamentarians and even after they cease to be parliamentarians. Have I made myself clear?
So, but as from the IT Act, maybe after the tenure of his parliamentary power, he had forwarded this footage.
Whenever he is forwarded, if he is otherwise protected, he is protected. His continuing as parliamentarian does not have any relevance to the prosecution. Like, that's why I wanted you to see 361, Article 361 says, governors, presidents, Raja Pramukhs cannot be prosecuted for whatever they have done even earlier. But they can be prosecuted once they cease to be the president, governor, or the Raja Pramukhs. So that means the immunity ends at the end of the period when they cease to be parliamentary, cease to be president or the governor or Raja Pramukhs. That is not the situation for, see, those are personal immunities granted considering the high sovereign office that they hold. This is because the function that you have to perform is such that you must be permitted to speak in parliament. That is the qualitative difference between a protection immunity under section 361 and an immunity which is granted for a parliamentarian under 105. Right?
Eka.
Any other questions?
No, you can just.
Okay.
What's
Yes.
it?
I would like to invite Advocate R. Rama, Executive Committee member of ILC, to propose a vote of thanks. Madam, please.
Good afternoon to all of you. The High Court unit of ILC feels privileged for conducting webinars. The solemn duty cast on me is to express our deep sense of gratitude to all present here. The meeting is chaired by Advocate C. Vatsalan, High Court Unit President of ILC. Thank you, Vatsalan sir, for the presidential address. The topic was presented by Advocate P. Parameswaran Nair, State Vice President of ILC, as well as ASG of the High Court of Kerala. Thank you, Parameswaran sir, for the introductory speech. Despite the busy schedule as a senior lawyer of the Supreme Court, Sri Basan sir has graciously accepted the invitation to address us all. Sir, thank you sincerely for your valuable knowledge. I thank Sri George Pachil, who has welcomed the gathering and Advocate Mekha, who is the master of ceremony. I thank all the office bearers of ILC, judicial officers, both present and past, senior lawyers, advocates from all parts of the country, prosecutors, teachers, law students, as well as law officers working in different establishments. Thank you.